with just a brief definition of food sovereignty as defined by the U.S. Food Sovereignty Alliance. Food sovereignty is the right of peoples to healthy and culturally appropriate food produced through ecologically sound and sustainable methods, and their right to define their food and agricultural systems. There's also 7 pillars of food sovereignty. Focuses on food for people, builds knowledge and skills, works with nature, values food providers, localizes food systems, and puts control locally. Food is sacred. First question, just to kind of get us, started. How do we ensure that everyone, particularly the most vulnerable in our society, has access to fresh and healthy food as part of our journey towards a food sovereign city? Anybody can start?
Well, that's a heavy question to start with.
Absolutely.
Yeah, if you don't mind, I'd like to share a little bit about my work and organization, and that will feed into my response. So I'm Chanel Scott-Contreras, the Executive Director of Prosperous Detroit. We focus on supporting micro and small businesses in Detroit's neighborhoods and in low to moderate income neighborhoods and some other communities as well. Our focus are working with residents, legacy residents, native Detroiters who are true leaders in their community. They're building. They have a vision for what they want for not only their neighborhood, but also the broader community. So we work with mostly Black, Latinx, Arab entrepreneurs in our city. And when I think about the question of around food sovereignty, my thought, just like the way we formed Prosper Us, is to invest in the community members who are rooted in community, who have been here serving their neighbors and their broader community for a long time, but without the resources needed. We like to say that talent exists in every community, but opportunity does not, and so that's part of the gap that we try to fill. But we know that the solutions already exist within the hearts and minds of people who have been here for a really long time. And so part of sovereignty for me is to support those local solutions that just have gone without the right capital, assistance, and social networks that other systems and other entrepreneurs have access to. So really supporting and being tapped into that. We have some strategies on how we do that in Prosper Us, but I'll get to that later.
So I'll go to the other end of the spectrum, and I think that when I think about food sovereignty, and we talk about community, right? And we use that word real loosely. It can mean a lot of different things, and so Detroit is very, very big. And we have multitudes of communities, and each community has its own characteristics. There's a set of circumstances and conditions that exist in each of our communities. So to me, when you talk about how do you create a scenario and a movement toward sovereignty as a goal for the city, it starts in each of those communities. Understanding, first of all, where is that community? Who is that community? What are the conditions that exist in that community? Okay, so where's their baseline? And what does sovereignty mean to them, right? Sovereignty can happen in degrees. We tend to like to think about big, all the way over here, we do everything. Well, we can't come out the gate doing everything. We might want to be sovereign about one crop. Maybe we grow all the greens we eat in our neighborhood. Maybe all the farmers markets provide all the greens we eat across the city as sovereignty, right? So I think we look at, the neighborhood level, determine culturally what's appropriate, because what's sovereign for me in the neighborhood I live in and what's sovereign for somebody else is going to be very different. Our resources are going to determine what sovereignty looks like. The pathway to sovereignty, to me, passes through access, security, and sovereignty. You just don't go from here to there. It's a process.
Yeah, I just want to piggyback on that. I think sovereignty means self-determination. So we have to make sure that communities are self-determining what their food systems look like. And yeah, just that.
Shout out to our local farmers and farmers markets. I'm Director of Community Economic Development at Joyce Southfield CDC. I appreciate you for giving us an info on Prosper Us. I'm actually a graduate of the first cohort out of Cody Group, so I appreciate that. So when we think of local and it being specific to neighborhoods, what can we do to better support our communities within their ecosystem from a justice and an equity perspective?
Well, I'm just thinking for because I work for the Planning Development Department, so part of what we do is framework plans. So we look at neighborhoods and go to the community and ask them, what do you guys want to see here? What are your needs here? What are you, do you need more green space? Do you need more, economic development? So we just try to go into neighborhoods and ask the community what they want to see. So I think that's first. And second is working with nonprofits and private sectors to help fund those projects. These are also community-led projects, community voice projects. So I think that's.
What came up for me when you asked that is more value on food. Food has value. It's just not something that we don't just eat, right? Food in of itself, it has many levels of value for us. It has social value. It brings us together, as people in our communities. And sometimes I think we forget about that. We think about, the nutritional value. So we don't just eat for fun. Well, maybe some of us do, and sometimes we do. I love ice cream, my favorite food group, right? So I don't necessarily eat ice cream for nutritional value, I eat for fun. So we eat food for a lot of different reasons. And so we want to take into consideration, how do we engage with people around food, both socially and nutritionally. So as eaters, I want to know my farmer. I don't know about everybody else. I want to know the person who grew those greens. I want to know who grew that arugula, and some of the other things that we enjoy eating. So I think that when we talk about how do we move, more toward that and bring value to it, is what is the value of food? Right now, for those of you who've been around for a while will recognize that, this is 2023. So 2013, we implemented the first urban ag ordinance, which was a big step toward valuing food. Because first of all, you got to value the use of land to produce food. Big deal. Now, it's taken us a little time, and we're making great strides on making land accessible in a variety of different programs so we can grow food close to where we live. So part of the challenge is the value. We have to value the people in terms of what food means to us. We need to, value the relationship that we have, with food, and also giving proper value to the assets that allow us to do this and build that culture, for that, So that's just one of the things that comes to mind is value, increase the value.
Yeah, Renee, I love what you said about valuing all those different aspects that bring food to our tables and have to uplift that value around people and highlight a way that Prosper Us is doing now. We've partnered with a group, they're called In the Business of Food, and they've launched a few programs. I want to call out and shout out our partners, Chef Idrit Gode, Jermon Booz, and Raphael Wright. They launched a program that I was really excited about called Taste the Diaspora Detroit. Can I show hands? Has anyone heard of Taste the Diaspora? Okay, wonderful. I'm so excited. And this is just such a great example of how people are in community and have these brilliant ideas and are able to work towards them. And they're attracting people to come and support their work. And that's it. I sought them out and was like, I want Prosper Us to support you all. So Taste the Diaspora creates shoebox lunches. They work with local chefs who work with local farmers and local produce and other ingredients to create these wonderful meals in the shoebox, which of course has a legacy in the Black community. When we would travel and wouldn't be able to make stops, because it wasn't safe to then have these kind of to-go lunches prepared for us, home cooked, on our journey. But they're also sharing these shoebox lunches in various communities that don't have access or wouldn't be able to afford them otherwise, and using it as a tool for building education and connectivity around food in neighborhoods that maybe are overlooked at times. So I wanted to shout out their work. Prosperous was really excited to be a partner and sponsor of the box, but what was even more exciting is that that led to this group of really talented chefs and they're just really visionary program managers to create a special food cohort, a program within Prosper Us, but designed by these experts. We call it Prep Your Food Business. It's a cohort, training-based content, education, but also one-to-one coaching so that they can take their business, whatever stage that they're at, and move it to the next level. So doing some kind of visioning and planning, and then an action plan to help that business succeed. And then of course we'll have access to the other resources that Prosper Us, like grants, other access to capital. We do a loan program. We're a community development financial institution. So it becomes a method to tap into these greater resources, but without us at Prosper Us pretending like we know and we're the food experts. We're not. So what we'd love to do is partner with those who are experts in their space to then offer the resources that they know their community needs. So it's been a wonderful partnership, and we're going to launch a second cohort later this year. So if you follow Prosper Us Detroit on social media, you'll hear about that. But yeah, I think part of it is really valuing the people who know what the community needs and can understand those gaps and help design them, right? That's just one example. Imagine if we did that, throughout every neighborhood and every pocket of the city around food, that we would be able to create the solutions that we need, right? Food sovereignty would be possible because we'd be investing in the people who know and are connected in this meaningful way to the challenges that we're facing. I'm not saying that, maybe a top-down approach can't be effective too, but we can't miss out on that opportunity to invest in local solutions, neighborhood-based solutions, because that's where I see our communities just really feeling and being included in a way, right? That transformational type of inclusion, being at the table. So that's what I love to see.
I greatly appreciate the connectivity, the support, the feeling that comes with food. This is one of my favorite times getting with folks, whether it's barbecuing, whether it's Thanksgiving, and the opportunity to indulge in fresh, local source items. With that being said, we've all known of Detroit as being a food desert, and within that being said, finding fresh produce. We've currently seen a trend of some local shops opening up. What are your thoughts on how we can increase that momentum within food justice and equity within our local communities?
That's a really great question, and it's got deep roots in it. Being a minority city, like many others are, one of the things that we wrestle with, continue to move toward, is eliminating the barriers. A lot of the barriers, we can talk about food sovereignty, but you can't talk about food sovereignty without talking about racial equity. You can't, they're inseparable, right? So if we're talking about achieving, moving from access to security to sovereignty in a city majority brown and Black people, then you have to get underneath the things that create the barriers to prevent you from being secure and sovereign. That's a big leap from secure to sovereign, right? And you cannot get there. Was recently involved for the last 4.5, 5 years doing a study of the food system in Flint. And if you know anything about Flint, resilient people, resilient systems, right? But all resilience is not good resilience. What do I mean when I say that? So a system can be resilient but resilient in a way that keeps you locked into a particular way of being and not allowing you to move to these other two states. We all came through this pandemic together. We should have learned a whole lot. I think we learned a lot. The question is, are we gonna stay woke and take action on the things that we learned, right? So we saw a lot of food being distributed, right? And we bought a lot of resources. But even before that, if I use Flint as an example, a city that's been in shock after shock after shock after shock. The economic shock when the big companies left, the shock of the water crisis, followed by the shock of a pandemic. So a food system locked in a donor regime. Everybody needs to eat. I'll be the first person to say everybody needs to eat, right? But we also have to be mindful of managing the tension in a system when we do like emergency food type systems, and you're trying also to build local food system. Over here we've got distribution. Now that's food coming from, I'll tell you, I got nothing against the farmers in Iowa. I just happen to love the farmers in Michigan and in Detroit, right? So there's that tension of elements in our system. And then underneath that, where are the barriers that exist that we have to overcome to allow us to even have a strong localized food system? We gotta wanna eat local food. You might have to pay a little more sometimes because it takes more to produce it, right? We have to have access to the capital. I just talked about how it took us a while to get to the land, right? So you have to get underneath that because everybody does not have access to the same resources. And so one of the things we have to do is look at where are those barriers. Some of them are race-based, some of them are priorities. There's tension around priorities. So we've got to get underneath it, to see where those barriers are.
Yeah, I'll just underscore, and you've said it wonderfully, but that idea of large-scale distribution, large-scale agriculture can sometimes work against that local effort, the local mechanisms. And when I talk about top-down versus kind of bottom-up, essentially that's what I mean. We should be investing in the local solutions that, maybe one program in and of itself can't meet the full demand or the full need of a community, but what if we had 10 programs collaborating together? What would it look like to approach scale from a more networked-based approach? Could we solve some of the challenges around food by thinking of our work, and don't get me wrong, like going with one institution or one organization to provide scale that meets the needs of X amount of community members is certainly easier, but it's also a very short term and kind of limited in its ability to solve long-term problems.
I agree with that.
I really just thought about when you talk about food sovereignty, especially food sovereignty Detroit, I'm thinking about policy, right? Why don't we need more policy that can incentivize local foods? And then even for the city, so if the city does do, local foods, food sovereignty is our main goal, but there are also policy at the state level that can impede on food sovereignty in the city of Detroit. So we can also think about from the state level, how can we prioritize local food even citywide?
No, that's an excellent point. It's always going to be the tension. I'm a big advocate of mixed systems. It's not either or. It's always both and. It's decentralized and centralized. There's some elements that we're going to require you to centralize, and just because of scale, you need to be able to do that. But that doesn't absolve all the opportunities for the things that can be decentralized, and move forth in our city. And you make an excellent point, Shelby. A lot of times people don't think about the importance of policy. Policy is enabling. To me, that's my language, right? It's enabling. It creates the environment and the conditions that allow for a certain thing to happen. So if you want something to happen, you've got to look to see first, do the conditions exist to allow for it? And the better we understand that, all of us, I mean everybody, right? You know, us as eaters, we need to understand what is allowing us to move toward sovereignty. You know, as people who are providers of services, we need to understand that. As the stewards of our community, which is how I like to frame our administration and our legislators as stewards, because, you know, they're acting on our behalf, right? So being able to be clear about where those opportunities to create the enabling conditions, you know, that we need, and the system changes that are going to be required, you know, for us to move toward that. Getting to a point of having that as a shared vision, you know, is the work that's at hand. You know, we can talk about stuff in the bubbles, but at some point it's gotta synergize and come together as the aim. We're all going that way. You know? Now we may have a lot of different reasons for how we're going that way, and a lot of different pathways, but policies underneath it, processes underneath it, people are all, you know, underneath our effort to move in that direction.
Love it, love it, love it. Systems, policy, people, and within those three, I picture gaps and opportunities, right? So May 16th, they just released Michigan's Path to a Prosperous Future, supported by 8 different philanthropies across the country, Kresge, Bond, to name a couple of those. Michigan currently lies in the bottom third in 3 key indicators: K through 12 education, household income, as well as household income, K through 12 education, and the third escapes me right now, but within that being said, the 10 in Midwestern states, out of the 10 Midwestern states, Michigan is 9th in regards to those same key indicators. We have the opportunity as a city, as a populace, that we've already known was hardest hit when COVID came through, from a food insecurity perspective, from a justice and equity perspective. How can we create systems that can support people in eating healthier? I think of my son. He loves vegetables. He's been eating salad since he can pick up a fork. So he recently ran for council at school. One of his mantras was, hey, I want us to have more food choices at school. We all know school lunches, all processed. I think the city of New York just debunked processed foods within the school system. Within us knowing health is wealth, how can we, from a policy perspective, make sure that we're supporting not only local communities, but supporting our most vulnerable within our youth?
I think about like maybe programs that incentivize local foods and like giving schools breaks off that local food, right? So like we have farmers, Michigan farmers, and say the state can pay, or the city can pay schools to basically buy the fruits and vegetables from those local farmers. I think incentivizing local foods, we have to do it. That's the way. And also education to children about healthy eating, of course, and saying that vegetables aren't good. My cousins, they like hate vegetables. They love chicken nuggets. I'm like, these vegetables are so good though. So I try to make it like, you know, an educational thing. So just those 2 things are really important.
Shelby, we were talking before we were brought up about planning. And, you know, you were sharing with me just some thoughts. I'd love for you to share with them. Just when you talk about, you know, how do you pull all those things together? You know, how do you create that common thread that goes through them? Planning processes help do that, right? You know, so say a little bit about just this idea of having a plan for food. You know, having a city plan for food?
Yeah, so not a lot of cities, but leading cities right now is Baltimore. They have a food access office within their city, and they have put together a food resilience plan. And in this plan, what's different with Baltimore is that usually when cities have sustainability plans, they have maybe just, we talked about this little section about food, but they actually created a whole plan about urban agriculture, emergency food systems, identifying your vulnerable communities, assessing risks that those communities are, the risks that are could actually hinder these communities, and also they created a Baltimore Food Resilience Work Group, which connected all parties, like local government, nonprofit organizations, community members, to create this network that worked on food, especially emergency foods. We're all working together when we assess the situation, so when these crises happen, we can be able to work together to get food to our vulnerable populations as quickly as possible, as efficient as possible. So a food plan, I think, would be really great for cities, just because COVID has taught us, obviously, that our food is very insecure right now.
And the link plans. I'm all about commitment. Y'all didn't know me. Is that my mic? That's that much energy through that mic? Maybe that's me. I don't know. Yeah, so all about dot connecting, right? So yes, Baltimore is amazing. Baltimore is like a twin city. If you've ever been there, it's a lot like what we're experiencing. I know a number of people there, visit there, understand, some of the work that's going on to build a plan like that. I think we have a unique opportunity in addition, because we're working, we have a sustainability action agenda. It has actions in there related to food. It has actions, in there that also link us to climate, which also is linked to food. And so I'm sure all of y'all have noticed by now how weather is just a little more Michigan than normal, right? And that's affecting even our ability to even get our food in the ground this year. So I think one of the other things, in addition to anytime we build plans that integrate, build plans that link to one another. We're soon to release our city's climate strategy. Food is a big part of climate solutions. The state's plan, the Michigan Healthy Climate Plan, food is a big part of climate solutions. And so while we have these plans, just making sure that we link them and leverage the work that we do. Because you asked the question about we're in schools, everybody's eating in a lot of different places. Let's find that through line across those plans and then work toward, a goal that everybody can relate to on some levels, for different reasons, but tie them all together. We definitely need a food plan for Detroit. Shelby said
I love that, and I think that I just simply agree that with a central focus on food, that plan could intersect with education, economic opportunity, climate,
Health
justice.
was the third I couldn't remember.
Yes, health, absolutely. All of these things are interrelated, and for that reason, they can be big and daunting, and it's easy to kind of just stick to silos and not integrate. But I think we have a wonderful opportunity to create systems change by interweaving these systems together. But it does beg the question: who's taking the lead? Who is facilitating the space? And maybe there's a role for philanthropy, for government to at least create that initial, those initial spaces where the conversation can happen, so that people can start to organize and that people can lead the change and see the solutions that they create, be invested in from all different mechanisms. This is a quick aside, because you mentioned your young son. I had the chance to study sustainable agriculture in undergrad, and I knew nothing about the topic, but was really excited that it included a trip to Cuba. So, but I just dove in. I spent a summer learning about the agriculture systems here in Michigan. Then we traveled to Cuba to understand their systems. And one of the things that I'll always remember, on the farm that I worked on in Cuba, you know, they had sweet potatoes. I believe they had bananas on their farm, and I remember the son of the family was literally 3 years old, and he could work that farm. Like, he was teaching me, I was following him around, he had his machete, and I was like, it's incredible how much wisdom this 3-year-old had. So I'll always remember Yolito was his name, and the education I received. And to me, it gets me excited about the possibilities. The young people are so capable of being leaders in the food space. And so where are we missing those opportunities so that, you know, it's not in high school we're trying to get them excited about vegetables. It's too late, right? they might not get there. But if they start young and understand the process and are connected to food, I think we're much more likely to have our future leaders invested, right? They'll be leading that food plan in 15 years. So I would love to see programming like that.
Transgenerational. It's like 3-year-olds are amazing people. Well, by the way, they really are. They all kind of cool stuff. They like to try stuff. And you talk about philanthropy and city. I think we have a big opportunity to do distributed leadership, right? To do a model that is designed to be collaborative in its nature. And it doesn't always have to seat, it can seat the energy and the responsibility across, a group of people. Yes, there are some that have more convening capacity, and definitely if you've got more convening capacity, put it on the table. Let's work with that. I think that as you said, that we have brilliant people. I mean, our city is full of genius people, and the younger people who just need for some of us that are in the third act to kind of lean back a little bit and let them step up a little bit. But I think that one of the challenges and opportunities we have in Detroit is to build a more distributed model of leadership and cross-transgenerational of all ages, and making sure that when we are creating opportunities for people to engage, that, because we're coming back to justice and equity and all of that, that you're thinking about what makes an opportunity most accessible to people. So if you planted it 3 in the afternoon, there's a whole bunch of people that can't come. Now, some of us are privileged, we work for ourselves, we tell ourselves what to do, we can go, right? Or you work with somebody and they send you, that kind of thing. But a lot of the people don't have that privilege, right? So we have to think about how do we create opportunities and platforms that are accessible for diverse folk to both lead and to actually be in the room when the meetings are happening.
I greatly appreciate that. And so food justice and equity, and you mentioned resilience, and within all three of those terms, what comes to mind readily is racism and systemic racism. I myself feel a certain type of way when I hear that Michigan is in the bottom third. Health, wealth, and education. Out of 10 Midwestern cities, 9, that motivates me. Like, those gaps, we gotta close them. And collectively as a whole, figuring out, okay, this is what we're gonna tackle, this is how we're gonna go about it. Intergenerational, white, black, whatever the case may be, how can we support and how can we make sure that everybody plays their part? We've seen our soaring food prices, from eggs to milk. How has that affected your organizations or the work that you do in trying to make sure that you're kind of crossing that divide and making it easier for folks to have some food access that's inexpensive.
I know it's been hard for the entrepreneurs we work with. You know, they're micro and small business owners. They need to survive, right? They're caring for themselves and their families and sometimes employees and neighbors. And so they are in a difficult position because the cost of food is going up, and they don't want to pass on increased prices to their customers, but they're in a really difficult position, and sometimes that's what they have to do. Or they have to think about, you know, expanding their market. So maybe they were focused on their local neighborhood and there's a certain income level there, and now they need to be thinking about higher income, you know, customer base. And so it becomes a really difficult situation, and frankly, I don't have the answer for it. But we know that, you know, it's not just an individual entrepreneur issue or even a Detroit issue, right? These are huge, these are connected to bigger systems of inequity, and that's why we can't solve one without that intersectional lens, without looking at income disparity, wealth disparity, you know, in the bigger term, like education. So yeah, I don't think the solution's easy, right? We have a lot of work to do, but I think we have to find those like small ways of when you can support local and support a local entrepreneur and pay a little bit more, you know, making the choice to do that with your own dollars is really important step.
Girl, you keep looking at me. So you talked earlier when you were describing, you gave the definition for food sovereignty, you talked about reliance, you know, being self-reliant, right? We have programs in our city and great organizations that help people learn how to grow their own food. That help cultivate the practice, you know, because it was, at one point it was fairly common. We live in cities, right? And we're from a global standpoint, we're in a place now where we're trying to get our food closer to us for a lot of reasons. All we need is one more shop, right? Every time this shop happens and you hear it's coming, where's the first place you run to? To the grocery store. And you're trying to get there before who? Everybody else, right? You know, so localizing our food and supporting that ability to have that capacity. So you talk about reliance. So that capacity starts at your house. You grow something in a pot. You know, you grow something in a small patch in your yard. You grow something with your neighbors. You can't grow by yourself, grow with your friends, grow with your neighbors, grow with somebody. You know, support the farmer who lives, you know, who's growing a little ways down, you know, the street, you know, to get us there. So that reliance, that mindset that says, you know, we're going to make it happen, you know, in the sense of applying, you know, ourselves to that work. We also, when people want to do something themselves, listen, and hear why, and consider that choice allows us to be more secure and sovereign, right? So if I want to grow my food, listen. When I say I need this land to grow food, or I need some capital to grow food. You know, we are currently in a place where it was 2013 when we did the ag ordinance. We're currently working on the livestock ordinance. Anybody in here eat eggs? Anybody? Oh shoot, almost everybody, right? The rest of y'all eat chicken, right? Y'all eat the egg or the chicken. Y'all eat one of them. You use honey? Anybody in here use honey? Oh, everybody in here uses honey. So when we start to talk about choice, you know, giving each other regard for the choice we make. You know, if I want to grow my own food, I want to grow and raise the food I want to eat, hear me. Listen Let's talk about enabling conditions that allow us to do things. If I want to go to the store and buy mine, okay, listen, can I get the store closer to me so that I can get it down the block, I can get it on a bus route, I can get it. So all those underlying things that allow me to make that choice and to create the level of self-determination and being resilient as a community, you know, getting underneath some of those things. A lot of times when we hear, we don't listen. People are talking, but we're not listening. We're not really getting to the why behind it. And I like to say, I'm gonna challenge us. Solve for yes. Can we solve for yes? Why is no so easy? Why is no always like right at the top of the, well, no, we can't do that, or no, don't nobody want to do that, or no, it's gonna take $1,400 and he dies, right? You know, how about we solve for yes?
I really appreciate that. I've had the opportunity to travel to a couple cities over the last few months, one being Minneapolis and the other being Seattle, and looking at their sustainability and some of the things they have going on, and hearing about other cities, other states. California's doing some amazing work, Philadelphia, and then I'm like, man, you know, I know we're doing some good work, but just as simple as composting, how can we figure out how to make that work?
Oh, that's the next panel.
Oh.
We're gonna say that juiciness. We're gonna say that juiciness for the next panel.
But it's good when you see systems in place and working. So within that being said, from just your position and your proximity to the issues and trying to get to some yeses, what can we do to encourage more yeses?
I'm gonna go back to conversation and listening. You know, it isn't that we don't know stuff. You know, creating and holding space for an overused word now is authentic. Real conversation where you actually kind of set aside, you know, put your own thoughts right here for a minute. Just right here. They're not going anywhere, you can get them back, right? And just suspend that for a minute and give actual full consideration to other options and what somebody else might be experiencing. Now, I look pretty good right today, don't I? Right? Look pretty darn good, right? So let's flash back though. Let's flash back to 2008. I was an unwilling participant in that whole little economic tsunami that we went through. So I looked cute. I still look cute. Drive my Lexus, my Toomey bag, my X number of suits, bridge card in my purse. Did I look like food insecurity? Episodic, right? So let's give considerations. Let's listen to people. Let's hear what's really going on. Because we think we know what's going on, but until we talk to each other, until we get up out of our seat, wherever we're sitting, and go hang out where somebody else is living every day. I remember being in Flint right after the water crisis. And we were doing conversations with the community because folk were not listening to them, right? And we were drawing these maps, concept maps. And we had all these elements. We were talking earlier about education and touches this, touches that. And this map looked a mess. It had so many lines and so many dots connected. And I will never forget this one statement this woman said. She looked at that, she said, "You think that's a mess? That's my life every day. That's my life." I will never forget that. Because we don't know. And until we put ourselves in the place to really listen, we hear stuff, but we don't get inside of it and give full consideration to what's happening. So when you talk justice, you talk equity, you talk security, you talk sovereignty, it's gonna require us holding some space, having some challenging, difficult conversations, and the most difficult ones are gonna be the ones you have with yourself. What is happening? What am I thinking? What am I feeling? Why am I reacting a certain way? And some of this stuff people don't want to think about. However, if we want to talk about all, by the time you use the word all and equity, then we've got to consider everybody. You know, and that takes a lot of heart, takes a lot of courage, it takes a lot of leadership. You know, it's going to be some ups and downs, it's going to be some ins and outs. We have to hold that as the ultimate. If we really want to go there and hold it for the long haul, it's not going to happen like in a day or two. It's going to take us a little bit of time. So going the long haul, being willing to persevere, to persist, to, you know, we can't flip it every 3 years. It's a long journey.
I'm going to pop in here because this is a multi-day conversation, not a 1 hour conversation. These are hardcore topics that we're learning through and experiencing and listening to, which is also the goal of today. So before you leave us, the four of you, we'd like to open it up to Q&A. And I'm sure that somebody's got a great question for the panel. And I will start, and I'll ask Chanel on Prosper Us. Listening to and of course experiencing this regularly with Prosper Us, what would you say would be a best practices takeaway that you utilize within the organization that would be applicable to food justice and equity?
Yeah, I love that question. And you know, one thing that we know by working with entrepreneurs, but also as a kind of smaller organization, we're one of the smallest and the only Black-led community development financial institution in the state of Michigan. We know that oftentimes those with power and privilege and resources will understand a problem or know that a problem exists, and they'll say, you know, I'm going to pull in this organization that I trust, who happens to also have power, privilege, and resources, to solve that problem. And meanwhile, I'm over here working at the community level, solving those same challenges, and have been doing it, right? Prosperous has been doing it for 10 years, I've been doing it for 6 years, and the entrepreneurs we've been working with have been doing it. And the community organizations that we partner with, you know, solve their problems. And yet, we tend to see investments flow to larger institutions that often have, you know, like, they have this longer runway to actually understand the problem. So my best practice to suggest is that if you have access to resources, or you're privileged, or have power or funding, do the research on who's doing that work already. Let's not reinvent the wheel here. Let's find those who are experts, but they've been doing it, like, kind of scraping by without enough resources. Let's invest in those places rather than standing up entirely new solutions when community members have been doing this work for years, sometimes for generations, without the proper resources to do it at the scale that they could.
Thank you. And this is also why we're putting together panels like we have today. So in other words, having the city with you, with a consultant, with your organization. I think these are critical opportunities to step through the solution findings that you should be able to hopefully have throughout today. So I definitely encourage everybody that's here to make sure that you're talking amongst one another, because you never know what those conversations can lead to. Shelby, in regards to your role also at the city, and as planning looks at equity and also how you know, is there maybe, there's many I'm sure, but is there maybe one or two top challenges that you see throughout your days of working within planning that you think would be a real nice touch point for the planning office and planning department to focus in on when you're looking at equity?
Let's see.
Big question.
Yeah. I think the main issue that we just as a city have is just like getting money for projects, right? Getting money for these community-led voices. We go to the community and we hear these voices, we hear what they want to do. Now, the hard part for us is to find the funding for those things. So I think that's one of the issues that I see, but just like we have to go out there and find it and work with private sector, public sectors to find the funding for those projects.
So wait, you have the same problems we do?
Yeah, yeah. And then one thing that I really dream would like for the planning department to do, of course, it's just what we talked about was the food plan.
Right.
Just focus a little bit harder on food, just because I've been working with organizations around the city with food sovereignty and things like that. We can definitely need some help there policy-wise. And also just COVID has taught us a lot, right? Like people who didn't think they were food insecure realized that they were. So I think that's a big issue that we need to hone in on before the next COVID or whatever that may be.
So a couple of us in the room were at Mackinac at the policy conference, and one of the topics or the theme of this year was the power of ands. And one thing of the many things that I love of Renee is that the way she thinks is truly systematic, and the fact that you brought in the word yes, and realizing that it's about saying yes, which I'm the believer of, it's about saying yes, and who knows what can happen. So I think that that's a real big takeaway for me from this panel in particular. I'd like to open it up also to see if anybody has a question or two for the panel. Please raise your hands. We can certainly, yes. We don't have, well, we have a mic, but yeah. If not, great.
Oh, got it.
Great.
Good morning. Good morning, neighbors. Good morning. I'm Crystal Green, off here in Detroit. Hey, cousin. And I'm representing the Friends of Rogel today with my question. So Rogel Park, coming up, old golf course that used to be right there on the corner of 7 Miles and off there. And it was a golf course, for a long time. And with the neighbors, the city, share the desire to bring that place to be a green space for everyone, the neighbors to enjoy. We would love to see it one day become a large-scale community garden for people to enjoy, but the problem is that it has been a golf course for so long, so the pesticides is contaminated right now. So we would like help really understanding the phase 2 soil analysis, to understand our options and to solve for yes, because they're saying they can't be a community garden but I'm like, okay, it can't be a community garden right now, but let's build for expansion. Let's think into the future, because there's things like phytoremediation, and the EPA is actually looking to do a study on phytoremediation. So that's money for us. If they want to go ahead and sponsor us, we'll do it. So I'm like, somebody help us. We need somebody to help us understand what we're looking at, understand our options, like real transparency here, instead of just saying no. All right, thank you guys.
We have about a minute, I'll just let you know here. And educate.
Shout out to Rogel. I grew up in that area, so I love that idea. Anybody got an answer? You, Glenn?
Well, I know nothing about soil. Renee?
Well, yeah, that's really a good question, because you raise a point that oftentimes the things that we want to do are land-based. And it will take, in some situations, addressing the condition of the soil in its current state so that we can prepare for the next best state, So being able to bring that project, to the attention, of the city, you have done so now. And being able to have people have some conversation with you. In fact, are you coming to the mic? Woo! How's that?
I wasn't expecting that. Good morning. My name is Antoine Bryant. I'm the director of planning and development for the city of Detroit. And I want to give kudos to Vaughn and her team for even hosting this event. I think it's tremendous, especially having a conversation about the business of food. Fantastic panelists, especially the urban planner there. She's the best. But no, we're really excited to answer the question about Rogel specifically. You probably noticed, Mark, we'll tell everybody else. A phase 2 study often can take 6 months. We are nearing the 6-month window, so it should be closing. We should have the results of that study, which will then enable us to answer better what should go in that area and how we should address it. Much more comprehensively, I want everyone to appreciate and understanding that, why I'm really excited we're having this conversation, there are resources available at the municipal level, at the federal level. What I found working not only just here, but also across the country, is that things get done when they're elevated. That's why this kind of conversation is very important. Because when things become a priority, you find the resources for it. Apologies, my bad, bro. I'm my bad. When you are able to highlight how important these kinds of conversations are, then you get the decision makers and the dollars get unlocked. And so it's vitally important that not only that we attend these kind of conversations, but that everybody under 40 share them on social medias and stuff like that. And I'll tell everybody, I'm old, I don't mind doing that. But make sure these kinds of conversations are out there, and that will enable us to have better resources to be able to manifest these kinds of initiatives. I'll be here the rest of the morning. We have fantastic staff. We've got great people here, and kudos to everybody for coming through. Thank you.
Thank you, Antoine. As you can see, this is going to be an informal day, which is exactly what we wanted. The point is to have, yes, a conversation. So this is what we wanted. Thank you. Panel, you did amazing. We're going to have to let you go for the moment because there's more to discuss, but really, thank you for being with us today. Okay? So as they're moving, thanks so much. You can grab a little coffee. We're going to have our next panel on. I wanted to give a big shout out.